There is a silence that is not quiet. It is the silence of an empty hallway, of a phone that does not light up, of a space in the bed that remains cool. It is an anticipation of an ending. This is the territory of a particular kind of fear, not a sudden shock, but a slow, persistent hum in the background of a life. It is the fear of abandonment that feels inevitable. It does not speak in shouts, but in a whisper that curls from the past into the present. You will be left. It is only a matter of time. It is the emotional groundwork laid for a goodbye that has not yet happened. Story of loss written in the heart long before it unfolds in the world. It begins not with a scream, but with a silence, a specific kind of silence. It is the space between a question asked and an answer received. It is the quiet of a room after a door has closed, even if the person is only going to the store. For most, these are neutral moments, empty of meaning. For the one who carries the fear, they are filled with a dense, invisible substance, a hum. This hum is the soundtrack to their inner world. It is a low-frequency anxiety, a vibration of waiting. It tunes their perceptions, turning ordinary life into a landscape of potential clues. A text message arrives. The typing bubbles appear, dance for a moment, and then vanish. For a heart unburdened by this fear, it is nothing, a distraction, a thought lost. For them, it is a small, silent earthquake. The narrative writes itself, swift and merciless. They have changed their mind. They have seen something lacking in me. They are tired of this. The conversation is over. I am being phased out. This is the central paradox. The fear of abandonment is not merely about the catastrophic final act of leaving. It is about the countless tiny rehearsals for it that happen every day. It is a psychological game of chess where every move the other person makes or doesn't make is interpreted as part of a slow, inexorable retreat. Goodbye in slow motion. Watch them in a social gathering. They are often charming, engaged, present, but if you could see beneath the surface, you would observe a subtle, relentless monitoring radar dish constantly sweeping the environment for signals of disconnection. Did their joke land a little too flat? Did that person's gaze linger a second too short on them? Has the group's energy shifted, leaving them on the periphery? They are exquisitely attuned to the emotional weather of the room, feeling responsible for any cloud that passes, any drop in temperature. They are the cartographers of a world they believe is always on the verge of erasing them from the map. In relationships, this vigilance takes on a more intimate, more draining form. There is a need for a certain rhythm of contact, a specific texture of reassurance. A good night message is not just a sweet gesture. It is a mooring line, tethering them to safety for the dark, uncertain hours of the night. A plan for the weekend is not just a plan. It is a promise of continued existence in the other person's world. When these rituals are missed or altered or performed with a perceived lack of enthusiasm, the hum grows louder. It becomes a dissonant chord that vibrates through their entire being. They might become experts in the archaeology of their own perceived inadequacies. They will sift through past conversations, examining every word they spoke for a flaw. Nettiness, a mistake that could explain the cooling they feel. Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I reveal a weakness that made me unlovable? The mind becomes a courtroom where they are both the accused and the prosecuting attorney, building a case for their own inevitable dismissal. This is not a conscious choice. It is not a desire for drama. It is the operation of a deeply held belief system and emotional core truth. To be connected is to be in a state of precarious, temporary reprieve from being alone. The connection itself is the trigger for the anxiety of its loss, so they live in the liminal space, the threshold between having and losing. They hold the love they have with a grip that is either too tight, threatening to crush it, or too loose, preparing for the moment it will slip away. And so their life becomes a performance for an invisible audience whose approval is the difference between existential safety and catastrophic freefall. They edit their emails. They modulate their voice. They offer the parts of themselves they believe are most acceptable and hide the parts that feel fragile, messy, real. The goal is to become indispensable, flawless, the perfect companion, friend, employee, to build a fortress of Worthiness so impressive that no one would ever consider leaving its walls. But the walls are glass and they can always see the outside, the world where they believe they truly belong, alone. The hum of absence is the sound of their own longing, echoing back at them from a future they are convinced is already written. It is the quiet, relentless proof of a truth they feel in their bones, that every hello contains the ghost of its corresponding goodbye. Before a word is spoken, a story is written. Before the mind can articulate a fear, the nervous system learns an expectation. The blueprint is not drafted in the reasoned language of adulthood. It is etched into the psyche with the primal, nonverbal ink of early experience. This is where the narrative of inevitable loss begins, not as a conscious belief but as a fundamental law of relational physics, learned in the cradle of our first connections. Imagine the infant, its world is sensation, the chill of air on skin, the gnawing pang of hunger, the terrifying helplessness of a need unmet, then warmth, the softness of it. Embrace, the sweet satisfaction of milk, the soothing sound of a hum for the infant. The caregiver is not a person, they are the environment, they are safety, sustenance, and the regulation of a fragile, fledgling nervous system. When this environment is consistently responsive, a foundation is laid, the world is trustworthy, needs are met. Connection is stable. But what happens when the environment is inconsistent, when the response to a cry is sometimes swift and nurturing, and other times delayed, absent, or tinged with irritation, or when the caregiver is physically present but emotionally distant, their eyes vacant, their touch mechanical, the child does not think, my mother is overwhelmed. Today, the child feels a seismic shift in the universe, the fundamental link between distress and comfort, between need and fulfillment, becomes unreliable. The world is no longer a safe, predictable place. It is a place where the source of all goodness can vanish without warning. This is the first draft of the blueprint. It states, in the silent language of the body, the when you need may not be there for you, your survival is precarious, connection is fraught with the terror of its disappearance. Perhaps it was a tangible loss, a parent who left, a divorce that fractured the home, death that introduced a final, unanswerable goodbye, the empty space at the dinner table becomes a monument to absence, or perhaps more insidiously, it was an emotional loss, a caregiver who was physically present but psychologically absent, lost in their own depression, anxiety, or struggles. The child learns to navigate this emotional void. They learn to be quiet, to be good, to be helpful, to be invisible, whatever strategy seems to most reliably conjure a flicker of attention, a semblance of connection. They learn that love is not a steady state, but something that must be earned, bargained for, and carefully maintained lest it withdraw. The child's brain, a magnificent pattern-seeking machine, begins its work. It observes the data. It sees that a mother's smile can vanish behind a door. It feels that a father's attention can be pulled away by a ringing phone. It internalizes the equation. To need is to risk devastation, to love is to pray-grieve. This is the birthplace of the adaptive survival mechanisms, the hypervigilance, the constant scanning of a parent's face for signs of mood, the preemptive stifling of one's own needs to avoid causing a stress that might lead to withdrawal, the clinging, the desperate physical holding on, the refusal to separate, the tantrum that is not misbehavior but a panicked attempt to prevent an existential crisis, or its opposite, the premature pseudo-independence, the wall a child builds deciding unconsciously, if I do not need you, you cannot hurt me by being unavailable. These strategies are brilliant. They are the best possible solutions a young psyche can devise for an impossible problem: how to secure the love and safety you need to survive. From a source that feels unstable, they are lifeboats built in a storm. But the storm passes, the child grows, they leave that house, that relationship, yet the blueprint remains. The lifeboat becomes their primary vessel for navigating all subsequent seas, even the calm ones. They enter adult relationships with the map of a past landscape, misreading the terrain of the present. A partner needing space is not a healthy adult setting a boundary, it is the parent withdrawing. A friend's distraction is Not a temporary preoccupation with work, it is the precursor to total abandonment. The old survival-level alarm bells ring at the slightest provocation. The adult mind, with its logic and reason, is often powerless against the primal conviction of the child who still lives within, the one who learned in the most formative moments that to love is to stand on a precipice, waiting for the inevitable fall. The blueprint is not a memory one recalls, it is a lens through which one sees. It is the gravitational pull of a past reality, bending the light of the present into a familiar and terrifying shape. The blueprint once drafted in the quiet chambers of childhood does not remain a passive document, it becomes an active, living architecture within the mind and body. It is a system, a deeply grooved pathway of anticipation, built from the very stuff of our biology and psychology. To understand its power is to look at the elegant, ruthless machinery that turns a feeling into a fact, a fear into a prophecy. At its core, this is a story of the human alarm system. The amygdala, that ancient sentinel deep within the brain, does not know the difference between a tiger in the bushes and a partner who is 30 minutes late. Its job is survival. It scans the environment for threat, and when it perceives one, it sounds the alarm. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The heart hammers, muscles tense, the mind narrows its focus to a single point: danger. For a child whose primary threat was relational instability, this alarm becomes wired to the slightest hint of interpersonal disconnection. A frown, a silence, a change in tone, these are the modern-day tigers. This is the neurobiology of the hum. It is not an illusion, it is a physiological event. The body is genuinely responding to a perceived threat to its survival, because in our earliest days a caregiver's absence was a survival threat. The system is working perfectly, just with a tragically outdated definition of what constitutes a mortal danger. Upon this biological bedrock, the mind constructs a psychological framework to make sense of the chaos. This is where attachment theory provides the language, the internal working models first proposed by psychologist John Bowlby are the cognitive maps we create about ourselves and others. The child who experienced inconsistent care develops a map with two fundamental coordinates. The first is about the other. Others are unreliable, they will not be there when I need them. The second is about the self. And it is the most insidious part of the blueprint. I am not worthy of consistent love. There is something inherently flawed about me that causes people to leave. This is the cruel genius of the architecture. It externalizes the cause of the pain. Others are unreliable while internalizing the blame. It is because I am unlovable. This creates a closed, self-verifying loop. The fear of being unlovable creates behaviors: clinging, testing, withdrawing, that constrain a relationship. If the relationship then ends, the old blueprint is confirmed. You see, I was right, I am unlovable, and they left. The possibility that their own fear-driven behavior contributed to the outcome is lost to the larger, more resonant narrative of their core unworthiness. The mind, in its desperate attempt to gain a semblance of control, becomes a master of prediction. It prefers the certainty of a negative outcome to the agony of uncertainty. So it begins to anticipate abandonment not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. This anticipation is a defense mechanism. If you can see the blow coming, it will hurt less. If you can preemptively feel the pain of loss while the person is still there, you are, in a twisted way, preparing yourself. You are building a callus over your heart before the wound is even inflicted. This is why the quiet moments are so loud. The mind is not idle in the silence. It is running simulations. It is playing out every possible scenario of loss, rehearsing the devastation so it won't be caught off guard. It is a relentless, unconscious effort to solve for the variable of the other person's love, to prove the theorem of one's own abandonment. The mind becomes a fortress, but one designed around a central crumbling pillar. Every calculation, every defensive wall, every watchtower is built to monitor and contain the very flaw that the architecture itself has declared to be at the center of the self. The architecture of anticipation is therefore a closed ecosystem. it filters out information that does not fit its design. A moment of pure, secure connection is dismissed as an anomaly, a fluke, while magnifying every piece of data that confirms its foundational principles. A forgotten errand becomes a symbol of neglect, a preoccupied glance becomes a sign of fading interest. The world is constantly being bent to fit the blueprint, and the body is constantly being mobilized to respond to the distorted reality the mind has perceived. It is a system built for a world that no longer exists, defending a self that was never truly flawed against a loss that has not yet happened. It is a masterpiece of psychological engineering designed for a single tragic purpose: to break your own heart over and over again so that someone else doesn't get the chance to do it first. The architecture of anticipation is not a passive structure. It demands action, it compels the building of defenses, when the core belief is that loss is inevitable. The only logical course of action is to try and control the terms of the ending. The heart, in its desperate wisdom, decides that a preemptive strike is safer than a surprise attack. It would rather be the architect of its own isolation than the victim of another's departure. And so the walls go up. These are not walls of stone and mortar, but of behavior and emotion. They manifest in two primary paradoxical forms: the fortress of cling and the citadel of flight. Both are strategies born from the same deep-seated terror, yet they appear as opposites. One shouts, "Do not leave me." The other whispers, "I never needed you anyway." The fortress of ceiling is built from a desperate need for reassurance. Its bricks are constant contact, the stream of texts, the need for daily affirmations, the seeking of promises about a future that feels perpetually unstable. The person inside this fortress is perpetually taking the emotional temperature of the relationship. They may become exquisitely attuned to their partner's moods, not out of pure empathy, but as a means of gauging their own safety. A bad day at the office for the partner is internalized as a threat. Are they angry with me? Did I do something? Is this the beginning of the end? This creates a relational vacuum. The partner can feel the constant pull of this anxiety, the unspoken demand to fill a bottomless pit of need. They are not being loved for who they are, but used as a salve for an ancient wound they did not inflict. The weight of this responsibility can become unbearable, creating the very distance the fearful heart was trying to avoid. Then there is the citadel of flight. This is the wall of preemptive withdrawal. If the fortress of cling operates on the principle of please stay, the citadel of flight operates on I will leave first. To avoid the agony of being chosen against, they choose to remove themselves. They construct an identity of hyper-independence. I don't need anyone, I am an island. They may end relationships at the first sign of trouble or more. Subtly, they may withhold their true selves, never fully committing, never fully showing. They believe they are building a safe room, but they are constructing a tomb for intimacy. Their partners often report a feeling of hitting an invisible barrier, a glass wall, through which they can see love but never truly touch it. The person inside the citadel mistakes the silence of their self-imposed exile for safety, not realizing that the echo in the empty chamber is the sound of their own loneliness, amplified. There is a third, more chaotic defense: the creation of a test. Unconsciously, the individual may engineer situations of conflict or distance to see if the other person will fight for them, will prove their loyalty. They push, they pick fights, they create storms, all to answer the unanswerable question, will you stay even when I am unlovable? It is a high-stakes gamble. If the partner endures the storm, there is a temporary, fragile sense of relief, but if the partner grows weary, if they withdraw in the face of the tempest, the old blueprint is confirmed with a devastating finality. See, I was too much, I drove them away. The great tragedy of these walls is that they are built with the bricks of a past that is over, defending against a future that may never come, at the cost of a present that is being utterly destroyed. The person becomes a prisoner and a warden in their own emotional jail. They long for connection from behind a barrier that makes true connection impossible. They starve for love while refusing to open the door when it knocks, for fear that it carries a hidden weapon. The hunger for connection and the instinct for self-protection wage a civil war within it. Single heart, one lunges forward, the other pulls back. The result is often a frantic, exhausting dance of approach and retreat, leaving both the individual and their loved one's dizzy and disoriented. The very behaviors designed to secure the relationship become the instruments of its unraveling. The fear of abandonment becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because it was an accurate prediction of the future, but because the actions taken to prevent it are the very ones that bring it to life. There comes a moment, often quiet and unannounced, when the machinery of anticipation grinds to a halt. It is not a dramatic shattering of the walls, but a single crack allowing a sliver of new light to enter. This is the turning of the lens. It is the slow, often reluctant process of shifting the gaze away from the ghostly figures of the past and the projected catastrophes of the future and onto the actual present moment. Reality, it begins with a question, so faint it is almost inaudible beneath the hum of fear. What if the story I have been telling myself is not the whole truth? This turning is rarely born from a grand success. More often, it is born from a profound and specific exhaustion, the exhaustion of having cried one too many times over a misinterpreted text, the exhaustion of having sabotaged a promising connection before it could even begin, the exhaustion of the constant, draining vigilance the body and mind, pushed for so long to operate in a state of high alert, simply begin to fail at the task. The system shorts out. The old strategies no longer feel like brilliant solutions. They feel like a life sentence. It begins with a moment of recognition. A friend says, "You always think people are about to leave you," not as an accusation, but as a simple, weary observation. Or perhaps in the stillness after a panic has subsided, one watches the evidence unfold and realizes the catastrophe did not, in fact, arrive. The partner who needed space simply needed space and returned. The friend who was distant was grieving a loss of their own. For the first time, the narrative of inevitable abandonment is held up against the contradictory data of reality, and it is the narrative that seems to falter. This is the beginning of what psychology calls mentalization, the capacity to see oneself and others as beings with independent, complex internal worlds, with thoughts, feelings, and motivations that are separate from one's own. The person who has lived by the blueprint has been trapped in a solipsistic nightmare where every action by another person is a commentary on their own worth. The turning of the lens is the dawning awareness that other people are not merely actors in their personal drama of abandonment. They are the protagonists of their own, equally complex stories. With this, a fragile curiosity emerges. Instead of reacting to the fear, one begins to observe it. There is the feeling, the tightness in my chest, the urge to send that text, to pick that fight, to run away. There is a subtle but critical shift from "I am abandoned" to "I'm having the feeling that I am being abandoned." This creates a sliver of space, a breath between the trigger and the reaction. In that space, a new possibility is born. It is in this space that a different kind of memory might surface, not a memory of loss, but a memory of unexpected steadiness, a time when they were vulnerable, messy, imperfect, and were met not with rejection but with compassion, a relationship that has endured not because they were flawless, but because it was resilient enough to withstand their humanity. These memories were always there, but the blueprints filtering system had labeled them as irrelevant, as exceptions to the rule. Now they are re-examined. They become the first pieces of counter-evidence in the case against the old narrative. This turning is not a one-time event, but a slow, repetitive practice. The lens will swing back to its old, familiar focus countless times. A perceived slight will send the mind spiraling back into the old grooves. The work is not to stop the spiral, but to notice it happening sooner, to gently, compassionately guide the lens back to the present, to ask, what is actually happening here right now? What is the evidence? What is the story I am telling, and is it the only story that could be told? It is the beginning of a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let the ghost of a past hurt dictate the terms of a present connection. It is the first tentative step out of the fortress, not with the certainty of safety, but with the courage to feel the fresh air on one's face, and to question whether the tiger one has been fearing all these years was ever really there. At all.